Star Trek The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Secret of the Lizard People, Chapter 3. Though Data had seen graphic representations of asteroid belts, he had never had the opportunity to observe a real one, that is, until now. From his vantage point, next to the communications console, he could see that this particular belt was comprised of hundreds of irregularly shaped rocks, each one between a half-kilometer and 5 kilometers in diameter. Fortunately, they were spaced far enough apart from one another to allow the Republic easy passage through their midst. Because somewhere in this collection of orbiting debris was the source of the distress signal they had received earlier. "Steady as she goes," cautioned Captain Clark. She had taken a couple of steps toward the view screen as soon as the asteroid belt became visible, nor had she taken her eyes off it since. Commander Sierra, who was still standing next to his commanding officer, moved now to a spot just behind the science console. "Anything unusual?" he asked casually. The science officer, a Pandrolite, shrugged his huge shoulders. "A fair amount of radiation emanating from some material in the asteroids," he muttered, "but nothing powerful enough to present a danger to us." "What'd he say?" Cinna wondered out loud, craning her neck to listen more closely to the officer's conversation. "He said there was a fair amount of radiation," Data replied. "However, it does not represent a danger to us." Yana looked up at him. "Thanks," she told him, frowning a little. Obviously, she had still not forgiven him for his decision to ignore her advice. "You are welcome," he assured her. "Be quiet," Majors whispered sharply, "or they'll tell us to leave the bridge." The android nodded, resolving inwardly not to speak out loud unless he was required to by one of the ship's officers. After all, he did not want to be the cause of their being dismissed. "I've got something," announced the navigator, a man with red hair and freckles who couldn't have been too long out of the academy himself. His fingers danced over his controls. "Same bearing as the signal, and its composition is markedly different from that of these rocks." "Can't see it yet," noted the captain. She folded her arms across her chest. "Try increasing magnification." Everything on the view screen seemed to jump closer to them, and as it did, Data caught sight of what they were looking for. Tilting his head closer to Cinna's, he whispered, "There it is." His friend looked up at him. "There what is?" "Some sort of space station," he explained. "With thruster capability, if its external structures are any indication, it is partially hidden by one of the asteroids." Cinna turned to the screen, then back to the android. "You see something out there? Besides all those big rocks, I mean?" It was only then that he recalled how much more efficient his vision was than that of any biological entity. "Yes," he confirmed. "I see the station I have attempted to describe, or more accurately, a part of it." Majors cast a glance in Data's direction. "I told you to be quiet," he reminded them. But it was too late. The captain had already turned to look at them. "Did I hear someone mention a station?" she asked. The android didn't detect any rancor in her voice, though he was hardly an expert on interpreting human gestures. In any case, he took a step forward. "I mentioned a station," he admitted. He pointed to the view screen. "The one up there," he added. Captain Clark's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "You can see a station?" she asked. "When no one else can?" She paused. "Are your eyes that good, Mr. Data?" The android nodded. "Yes, sir." It was no more than the truth. His eyes were that good. A few minutes later, his observations were shown to be accurate as the Republic edged nearer to its target. The source of the distress signal was some sort of alien space station, though they couldn't find anything like it in the ship's computer files, and it had clearly crashed into one of the asteroids with which it was still entangled. To Data, the alien structure looked like a collection of white cones sticking out at odd angles, larger ones alternating with smaller ones. Some of the cones appeared to have windows in them, while others did not. There were also several small inverted cones, which the android had assumed were the station's thrusters. Take a sip, quick, Dr. Pepper. I know you should not. Don't drink soda pop. Drink water. Yeah. The navigator seemed to agree with the assumption. Leaning back in his chair, he said, "Looks like it was trying to negotiate this belt when its thruster array misfired. Its inertia carried it into the asteroid, and boom!" Captain Clark turned to her science officer. "Survivors?" she asked. He shook his head. "Impossible to say. There's too much radiation in the area. I can't even tell if any of its systems are still operable." "No one on board answers our hails," reported the communications officer, a blond man with a neatly trimmed beard. "Either they're not receiving," his voice hung ominously in the air, "or there's no one left alive to hear us," the captain concluded, "even though it's still sending out a signal." She scowled and turned to the science officer again. "How much time do we have before the planet's ignition?" The super Jovian worlds, Data had mentally put them aside in his preoccupation with the alien space station. He knew the answer to Captain Clark's question nearly 2.5 seconds before the science officer gave it to her. 7 hours, 16 minutes, replied the Pandrolite. "And when it ignites, it'll destroy this station and anyone on it, alive or otherwise." Captain Clark bit her lip. "Is it possible for us to beam an away team over to the station so we can get some idea of what happened there?" The science officer shook his large, blue-skinned head. "Not with all the radiation we've got here. If you want some first-hand observations, you're going to have to send a team over in a shuttle." The captain weighed the option, her only one apparently, for a second or two. Then she grunted. "Shuttle it is," she decided. "I'll get one ready," responded First Officer Sierra, "and a team as well." He was halfway to the turbolift when Captain Clark held up her hand. "Hang on, Mr. Sierra. We can't spare experienced personnel for this purpose. I need them here with me in case something goes wrong." She turned to Data and his colleagues. "Looks like you folks are elected. Pick up some containment suits down in ship stores and meet Commander Sierra in Shuttle Bay 1. The first officer didn't seem altogether comfortable with the idea of leading a handful of cadets. "Captain," he said, "if there are survivors, they'll likely need some kind of medical attention." "Agreed," his commanding officer responded. "That's why you're going to bring Dr. Steinberg along. If there's a problem in that regard, she'll be able to handle it." Clark harumphed. "She'd better be. Dr. Steinberg is about the only healthcare professional we've got on board." Commander Sierra looked as if he would have liked to protest further. However, he swallowed whatever additional objections he may have had and made his way to the lift. Data and his fellow cadets fell in behind him. Like the others, the android looked forward to the prospect of seeing what had happened on the alien station. He hoped above all that he wouldn't appear incompetent in the eyes of Cadet Glenn Majors. I think Data's got a crush on Glenn Majors. I don't know, it seems like it. As Data and the other cadets filed into Shuttle Bay 1, the android reflected on how seldom he was likely to need a containment suit in his Starfleet career. After all, the alloys of which he was constructed provided protection for him against most forms of radiation, not to mention extreme heat and cold, and he was capable of going for long periods of time without oxygen. Of course, the radiation that had disabled the alien station might be one form to which he was vulnerable, and even if radiation turned out not to be a problem, he would need a means of conversing with his fellow away team members. The containment suit's built-in communicators provided that means. Commander Sierra was standing next to the entrance to one of the shuttles, waiting for them. Dr. Steinberg, a sturdy-looking woman with blunt features and light brown hair, was speaking to him in clipped whispers. Data got the distinct impression that the two officers didn't intend for the cadets to hear their conversation, but of course, he couldn't help it. "Whose crazy idea is this?" asked the doctor. "Saddling us with a bunch of cadets on an away team?" First officer grunted. "Not mine," he whispered back. "The captains seemed to feel they could use the seasoning." Dr. Steinberg shook her head. "Seasonings for when you're not operating under a deadline. I'm going to have a talk with our fearless leader when this is all over." Sierra smiled. "For all the good it'll do. You know how stubborn she gets." The doctor snorted. Well, I can get pretty stubborn myself." Data was not surprised by Steinberg's lack of confidence in him and his fellow cadets. He hoped that by the end of their mission, the doctor would have a different view of them. Then the cadets were almost on top of them, and Steinberg and Sierra had to terminate their conversation. The first officer inspected each of his charges in turn, making sure their suits were sealed properly and their communicators functioning. "All right," he said, once he was satisfied everything was in order. "Everybody knows what our mission is, right? We have a look around, locate the aliens that populated the station, and effect their rescue if possible. Unfortunately, we don't have time to engage in a full-scale investigation of the place. Just in and out as quickly as possible. Got it?" Data watched Cadet Majors. When he nodded, the android nodded too. Then he entered the shuttlecraft and took their places in the seats provided for them. Within a matter of moments, Commander Sierra had moved them through the bay's force field and out into the void of space. Peering past Cinna, who was seated in front of him, Data saw their objective through the forward observation port. The station was less than 3 kilometers away, short trip even for a shuttle. Glenn Majors was in the seat across the aisle from the android. Data observed him for a moment, but the human didn't return his glance. He was obviously too intent on what was ahead of him. The other cadets, scattered about the cabin, were silent as well. Before long, the android could make out something that resembled a bay door in the hull of the alien station. Apparently, the first officer had noticed it as well, with the help of his sensors perhaps, because he was piloting them in that direction. Data could also discern a webwork pattern of small projections on the station's hull at intervals of less than a meter from one another. It was logical to assume that these were designed to provide handholds for exterior repair crews. Of course, in dealing with an unfamiliar culture, one had to remember that appearances could be deceiving, or so Data's instructors at the academy had warned him. In the present instance, for example, what looked like a bay door might have turned out to be something else entirely. However, as the shuttle closed in, what looked like a door slid aside and revealed itself to be a door, in fact. The chamber beyond it was big enough to house the Republic shuttle and several more like it. "Seems at least one system on that station is still up and running," commented Dr. Steinberg. She turned to look back over her shoulder at the assembled cadets. "That means we may find life support still functional as well." Commander Sierra guided them in through the open doorway. No sooner had they touched down on the surface inside the station than the doors slid into place again, closing them off from the vacuum of space, and a second later there was a soft whoosh sound of atmosphere flooding the chamber, Data guessed. "How is it?" asked the doctor. The first officer shrugged as he consulted his instrument panel. "Looks breathable," he noted. "Acceptable temperature, too, and gravity is 0.98% of Earth normal. If it weren't for the radiation problem, we probably wouldn't need our suits at all." "But there is a radiation problem," Steinberg responded. So we'll keep them on. She eyed each of the cadets in turn. Won't we? They all agreed that they would. Then Commander Sierra opened the hatch in the side of the shuttle and stepped out to look around. A few moments later, he gestured for the rest of them to follow. In less than a minute, they were all standing outside the shuttle, looking around the alien chamber. If it had ever been used as a vehicle bay, it was empty now, except for their own vehicle, of course. The bulkheads here were white, like the exterior of the station, and the cone pattern was repeated on them, though only in the minutest detail. To the human eye, Data was certain, the bulkheads looked almost perfectly smooth. All right, people, said the first officer. He pointed to the bulkhead to the right of the shuttle, where the outline of a door could be seen rather easily. Let's move out, and before he could complete his instructions, the deck bucked savagely beneath their feet, throwing them all to the ground. All except Data, of course, and even he had trouble keeping his footing under such adverse conditions. Then, as quickly as the incident had begun, it was over. Normalcy was restored. Picking themselves up, the android's biological companions gazed warily at one another and at their surroundings. However, there was no repeat of the strange and sudden quake. What was that? Asked Cadet Petros. She was rubbing her elbow, on which she seemed to have fallen. Good question, replied Commander Sierra. My guess is that the station's propulsion system isn't entirely disabled after all, and that curve it just threw us is one of its fits and starts. Cinna looked at the first officer. Then we can expect that sort of thing again, she noted. It wasn't a question, but Commander Sierra answered it anyway. I'd say it's a good possibility, yes. So let's stay on our toes. Dr. Steinberg sighed. If the frown on her face was any indication, her discussion with the captain would be even more heated than she'd originally intended. The first officer, on the other hand, didn't show any outward signs of being daunted by the tremor. With a wave for the rest of them to follow, he led the way to the bulkhead with the door in it. Like the door in the hull of the station, this one slid aside at their approach, revealing a corridor beyond. Commander Sierra walked up to it, poked his head out, and looked both ways. Then he stepped through. Data caught a glimpse of Glenn Majors as the rest of them filed out of the open doorway. The second-year cadet seemed as calm and confident as the first officer. Only his eyes moved, taking in sights that no Federation citizen had seen before. Once everyone was out in the corridor, the android could see that it followed a gently curving path in either direction. Which way would they go? Dr. Steinberg scanned the place with her medical tricorder. Judging by her expression, the results were not promising. No evidence of life signs whatsoever, the doctor announced, her voice flat with disappointment. Though the radiation is making it rather difficult to obtain a reliable reading. It may be that there are no life signs to read, Cadet Petros pointed out. Then, noticing the looks of disappointment her remark had prompted, she added, Of course, for the time being, we'll naturally assume otherwise. They still hadn't decided which direction to take in negotiating the corridor. It was Commander Sierra who finally came up with a plan to address that problem. We'll split up, the first officer announced. Majors, Data, Cinna, and Petros here with Dr. Steinberg. Everyone else is with me. He thought for a moment. We'll meet back here in half an hour tops, and sooner, if necessary. If necessary? Echoed Data. Sierra regarded him. If there's another quake, much worse than the first, the human explained, or a series of them. He took in the rest of them with a glance. Anything that looks too dangerous for us to handle. In any case, the doctor added, we'll stay in communicator contact so there won't be any real judgment calls, right, Commander? The first officer nodded. He pointed to one end of the corridor. "Good luck," he told his fellow officer. "Thanks," she tossed back at him. "You too." Then, as Commander Sierra and his chosen team departed, she turned to her own charges. The android looked at her expectantly. "Well," said Dr. Steinberg, "here's where the real fun begins. Shall we?" "Certainly," replied Data, though no one else uttered a word, including Majors. As his fellow team members started down the corridor, he realized that he had answered a rhetorical question, yet again. He would have to be more careful to avoid that in the future. Chapter 4. Data would have expected that after several minutes, the curving corridor they were following would have intersected with some other corridor or produced something like a turbolift. As it turned out, it did neither of those things, nor did it produce any sign of the station's occupants. Finally, Dr. Steinberg couldn't help but take note of the fact. "Still no trace of the owners," she observed. "Doesn't exactly inspire confidence, does it?" "Maybe they had to cluster together to escape the radiation," Senna suggested. "Some parts of the station may be shielded from it better than others." The doctor nodded judiciously. "So you're saying the survivors are all hiding somewhere, and we just haven't stumbled across them yet? That could be, I suppose. And believe me, the physician in me hopes you're right. But we won't know for certain," Majors reminded them, "until we find some of them." Dr. Steinberg looked at him. "That's true as well. I just wish they were a bit—" Data never heard the end of her sentence. He was too busy focusing on the faint sounds coming from the stretch of corridor just ahead of them, the faint scraping sounds. Cinna must have noticed some outward indication of his concentration because she asked, "What is it?" The android shook his head. "I cannot say with any degree of certainty," he replied. "However, I believe something or someone is moving toward us along the corridor." The doctor shot a look back over his shoulder, but there was nothing there. Neither a sound nor any other sign of the station's occupants. Turning to Data again, she asked, "Are you sure you heard something? It wasn't your imagination?" "Technically, I do not have an imagination," the android informed her. "Of course, it is possible for my auditory circuits to suffer a malfunction, but in this instance, I do not think that is the case." "Wait," said Petros. As she glanced past Data, her dark brows came together in concern. "I just heard something myself, like a—" Her voice trailed off ominously. "A growl," supplied the android, finishing the thought for her. After all, he had heard it too. Even as he spoke, he heard a third such sound, and a fourth. By then it seemed the entire team had heard, because their heads had snapped around and their eyes were focused on the corridor. The growling grew louder and closer. Major's eyes narrowed. "We gotta get out of here. Fall back, review the situation. There's no point in endangering ourselves unnecessarily. We may be the only hope for the people on this station." Data looked at the cadet, more impressed than ever. And Majors was right, wasn't he? If something happened to the away team, the station's aliens would never be rescued in time to avoid the Super Jovian planet ignition. Apparently, the doctor agreed as well. "Come on," she said, beginning to retrace her steps. "We're going back the way we came, at least for now." Just then, the android heard another round of distant growls, but not from the corridor up ahead. This time it was coming from behind them. "I am not certain that would be a wise course of action," he advised Dr. Steinberg. She looked at him quizzically. "Why not?" "Because," he explained, "unless I am mistaken, the same organisms that are ahead of us are also behind us." As the growling up ahead of them grew louder, the doctor's mouth became a thin, hard line. "You're right," she confirmed. "I hear them too." She looked around for a moment, then grunted with frustration. "Looks like we've Got only one option, my least favorite one. Set your phasers on light stun and follow me. There was a series of rasping sounds as they drew their weapons and set them according to Steinberg's instructions. Then, satisfied that everyone was prepared, the doctor started back along the corridor in the direction of the shuttlecraft. The growling from both directions, but in particular from ahead of them, grew louder and fiercer with each passing second. Data stole a look at Majors, who seemed every bit as determined and focused as before. Taking heed of the cadet's example, the android held his phaser ahead of him and readied himself for whatever they might encounter. Even so, he was surprised by the suddenness with which they were attacked. Before he knew it, the corridor was full of what looked like two-legged lizards, large, powerful creatures with scaly yellow skin and slitted purple eyes. The doctor was barking orders at the cadets as they tried to catch up to the darting lizard forms with their phaser beams. Data only heard snatches of her words over the din of their adversaries' deep-throated snarls. Back to back. Break formation or that it's just practice. It's shot count. After their initial confusion was over, the cadets began to connect with their targets, but the phaser blast didn't seem to faze the lizard beings. And once they realized that, they came on with renewed fury. Heavy stun, cried Dr. Steinberg at the top of her lungs, and the cadets tried to do as she told them, but there was no time. The lizard creatures were all over them, pounding and clubbing them with their fists, gouging and slashing at them with their claws. The raw brutality of the assault took its toll on the android's companions. Cinna took a blow to the head and crumbled. Majors was slammed into a bulkhead. Petra's arm was wrenched up behind her, forcing a scream out of her, and the doctor was lifted high into the air, where her antagonist glared at her with saliva dripping from its maw. Data didn't wait to see what the lizard creature had in mind for Dr. Steinberg. Bringing his superhuman strength into play, he grabbed the arm that held the physician aloft and, with his other hand, slugged his scaly adversary across the mouth. The impact was enough to make the lizard being release Dr. Steinberg and recoil, but a moment later, as the android caught the medical officer in his arms, the creature recovered and leaped for his throat. Sweeping Dr. Steinberg behind him, Data caught one of his opponent's wrists and whipped him toward a bulkhead. Had he taken the time to watch the lizard being's progress, he no doubt would have seen it hit the metallic surface and slump to the deck. But he didn't have the time. He was too busy bracing himself for the attack of two other creatures. He fended off the first of them with a backhanded smash. The other managed to get a sharp-clawed grip on his arm. The android was about to take hold of the lizard being by the scruff of its scaly neck and fling it away when he was filled with a sensation unlike any he'd ever known. It was as if a powerful electrical charge was running through him, savaging the workings of his neural net, disrupting his most basic functions. Even as Data sank to his knees, no longer in control of his own limbs, he realized that the electrical emission had come from the creature holding onto his arm. Of course, it had no way of knowing how effective its emission would be, or that it would disable him 1,000 times more surely than any brute force the lizard beings could have brought against him. Taking note of his helplessness, another creature jumped him, and another. Unable to defend himself, he could only watch as they tore at his containment suit and speculate as to what it would be like when they got past it and began tearing at him. Abruptly, one of his antagonists was thrown clear of him. The other two were ripped loose as well, in quick succession. Incapable of even turning his head, the android could only see a trio of bright red phaser beams crisscrossing in the air above him, and by that he knew that all wasn't lost quite yet. Apparently, his efforts had bought his comrades some time, enough to adjust their phasers to a higher setting, which was proving somewhat more effective against the lizard beings. Lying face up on the deck, Data observed the creature's abrupt departure out of the corner of his eye. In a matter of only a few short moments, the corridor was clear of them. The only ones left standing were Dr. Steinberg and the 3 human cadets. Kneeling beside the android, the medical officer ran her tricorder over him. She seemed pale, and her hair was in some disarray, but her concern for him seemed to override any of her other worries. "What happened to him?" asked Cinna, not even bothering to try to disguise the anxiety in her voice. "He seemed to be doing fine, and then—" Her voice trailed off ominously. Dr. Steinberg frowned. "I don't know enough about him to make any kind of detailed diagnosis. However, it seems he suffered some kind of electrical shock, one that was powerful enough to upset the delicate electronics in his artificial nervous system." Data was unable to speak, or he would have confirmed her findings. As it was, he wouldn't have had time to do so, because a moment later he heard the same sort of growling that had alerted them to the lizard being's attack. "It's them again," announced Petros. She turned to the medical officer. "What do we do?" she asked. Dr. Steinberg cast a troubled glance in the direction of the growling sounds. "We go the other way," she decided. But there was no guarantee that that way wouldn't be full of lizard beings soon as well. Perhaps it already was, the android reflected. "Wait," said Cinna, apparently thinking along the same lines. She pointed to what seemed to be an access panel in the bulkhead. "If this station is like one of our ships, it's got a network of tubes going through it for maintenance purposes, one that we can use as an alternative to the corridors. And that looks like a way in." The medical officer looked at the panel, then at Diana, and then at the panel again. "There's only one way to find out," she reasoned. Without any further comment, she proceeded to the panel and attempted to work it free of its place in the bulkhead. The thing came out with surprising ease. The open space behind it was quite suggestive of a tunnel. It seemed increasingly likely to Data that Cinna's theory was correct. Turning back to the cadets, Dr. Steinberg pointed to the android's prone form. "Majors, Cinna, pick Data up and follow me in. Petros, you bring up the rear." As Cinna bent to the task, Cadet Majors hesitated. "Sir," he said, addressing his comment to the medical officer, "is it wise to try to take Data with us? He'll slow us down considerably. I doubt the lizard beings can do anything to him that they haven't already done." The android didn't take the statement personally. He weighed it from an objective standpoint and came to the conclusion that Majors was probably correct in his assessment of the situation. However, Dr. Steinberg shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "Data's one of us, and we don't leave our people behind, android or otherwise." Majors looked as if he would have liked to press his case, but there wasn't time. The growls were getting louder again. Picking up Data by his arms, the second-year cadet waited for Cinna to lift the android's lower half. Then, when they had him securely, they brought him over to the opening in the bulkhead. "He's a lot heavier than he looks," breathed Majors. Cinna no doubt thought so as well, but she didn't say so. She just gazed down at Data with that worried expression. Perhaps she was right to be worried, the android mused. After all, no one knew when, or even if, he could be repaired. Inserting Data into the opening, Majors and Cinna crawled in past him. Then, with Iana and the second-year cadet dragging the android behind them, Petros pulled the panel back over the opening. Immediately, the party of 5 turned right and made its way along what looked like the inside of a long white cylinder, perhaps 2 meters in diameter. The thing seemed to stretch for a long way in either direction. "Petros," called Dr. Steinberg, her voice echoing in the confined space, I want you to scan the tube behind you for those lizard creatures. I'll do the same up here. Aye, sir, said Cadet Petros. Anything? Asked the physician. Nothing here in the tube, returned Petros. But I'm reading several of them moving through the corridor on the other side of the bulkhead. 8 of them, to be exact, all together like a pack. Data heard Dr. Steinberg mutter something beneath her breath. Then more loudly she said, I'm picking up a bunch of them out there too. I'd say we'd be doing ourselves a favor by getting out of this area as soon as possible. But she didn't take her own advice, at least not right away. Tapping her communicator, the medical officer called for Commander Sierra, no doubt to warn him about what they had encountered. There was no answer. She tried a second time. Again, no response. That meant one of 2 things, Data decided. Either the radiation was preventing Dr. Steinberg's communicator from going through, or something had happened to the first officer's half of the away team. For the time being, there was no way of knowing which set of circumstances had prevailed. Apparently coming to the same conclusion, the doctor gave up on warning Commander Sierra for the moment and started off along the length of the tube. The others followed, with Data in tow. As they proceeded, the android caught an upside-down glimpse of Glenn Major's face every now and then, whenever his head lolled in the right direction. The cadet was scowling at him, no doubt displeased at having to expend precious energy on what must have seemed to him to be a lost cause. The android regretted being a burden. If he could have spoken, he would have said so. As it was, he would have to endure his helplessness in silence. Petros, called Dr. Steinberg, how long have we been on the station? There was a pause. A little more than an hour, came the response. Less than 5 hours to go before the Super Jovian planet ignition. Petros volunteered, obviously seeing through to the reason for the medical officer's question. 5 hours to the Super Jovian planet ignition, thought Data, and the end of their mission, if not their lives. After all, if they didn't get back to the shuttle in time, they and the rest of the station would be destroyed when the planet became a sun. No sooner had that grim notion crossed his mind than he felt the fingers on his right hand twitch. Focusing his attention on them, he felt them move again, this time at his command. Was it possible that he was regaining control of his body? That the effects of the electrical charge that had disabled him were only temporary? Data, gasped Cinna, her eyes wide. She turned to look at Dr. Steinberg, who was up ahead of her. I think he moved. A moment later, they stopped dragging him. The medical officer's face loomed above his as she ran her tricorder over him. I do believe his situation's improving, she commented thoughtfully. She leaned close to the android's ear. Can you hear me, Data? The android tried to speak. Yes, he croaked finally. Hear you. Steinberg smiled encouragingly. I think, she said, the situation is very definitely improving.